This should serve as a pretty good UI prototype for our final system. Success! Hey everyone, welcome to episode 2 of my dev diary, developing a VR exposure therapy game in Unity for the Oculus Rift. Last time we found that one of the key changes we want to make away from the prototype is completely re-engineering the UI, because it was just so needlessly complicated before. This is basically owing to the fact that we were only using the joypad on the touch controller to navigate the UI, and that means you have to write a whole bunch of code to keep track of which UI element you currently have selected, which UI element is the next in the direction you're navigating in, and how many there are in that direction, and it's just a nightmare. I did it this way because I'd never actually made a proper Unity UI before, and I guess I was just sticking to what I knew. I've made Unity games in the past, but they've pretty much exclusively been just keyboard input. No mouse, so no cursor to easily navigate with. Since we're basically going to be using the motion tracking on the controllers, we can just point at the UI. It's basically going to be the same as a mouse cursor as far as the implementation is concerned. Now, instead of starting a project and trying to figure out how to implement a system that I've had no real experience with, I'm going to make a clean Unity project, a clean scene, and just tinker and experiment with this new UI in a vacuum. This is going to make it so much simpler than just building the UI into everything else straight away. If something breaks or it isn't working properly, I'll know that problem is actually with the UI and not with any of the 1,000 other things happening in the background. It also just makes good sense to get an understanding of how the UI code will fit together before designing the overall architecture of the game. Let's get started. Okay, so turns out another huge benefit of building the UI in an isolated scene like this is it means we can get all of the silly mistakes just out of the way. And oh yes, I made some silly mistakes here. Firstly, I had the Unity Oculus integration package working. I could look around, I had my hands in the scene, and then Unity gave me a little yes/no pop-up, which I didn't even read. I just clicked yes so it would go away and I could get back to my work. Unity restarted, came back, and then there were a whole bunch of errors that I just didn't understand. Mistake number 1, don't just click yes on a dialogue without actually reading it. Unity might be trying to tell you something important. I did some light Googling, but I couldn't really understand why I was getting this error. It looked almost like the Unity Oculus integration package had imported twice somehow and was conflicting with itself. I tried removing the package and re-importing it, but I just kept getting the same error. Now luckily this is exactly what version control is for. If you break something, just roll back to your previous commit and it will be fixed. That is assuming that you were using version control. Mistake number 2, always use version control. There's no reason not to. Even if it's just a little project where you're just playing and tinkering around, it takes all of 90 seconds to set up a Git repo. And honestly, it's just good practice to stay in the habit of regularly committing your code. Luckily, since I wasn't particularly far into this project, it was quicker to just start again rather than dig around the internet and fix the error. But the lesson still stands. After following a few guides, I got a motion tracking canvas pointer working with a few buttons, saved my code, closed Unity, and took a break. And then something happened that's happened to me so many times. I opened Unity back up to find that my scene hadn't saved. It's probably because I didn't hit save. Mistake number 3, don't forget to save the Unity scene as well as your code. I always do this. I always expect Unity to be smart enough to auto-save my scene when I hit play, or I think that because I've saved my code in Visual Studio, that means the Unity scene will save. It's just not how it goes. Unity does do an autosave that gets stored in some temporary folder in case Unity crashes, but that gets wiped as soon as you open Unity back up, and chances are you're not going to remember that your scene didn't save until you open up Unity and see that nothing is there. I could just tell myself to get better at saving, and I will try, but I can still see myself making this mistake a lot of times in the future and just costing myself even more development time. What we're going to do instead is take this script that I found from Stack Overflow, drop it in our assets folder, and that basically forces Unity to save our scene whenever we hit play. So starting my scene from scratch, again, I went back to the guides I was using and couldn't find them. I hadn't bookmarked them. Which brings us to mistake number 4. Always bookmark your guides. It's a really small thing, but if you find a guide that you had to hunt around for a little bit, just bookmark it. Otherwise you'll lose it and you have to go trawling through your browser history and it just wastes your time. I could have just watched back the footage that I shot earlier to see what I did, but it turns out that I hadn't recorded the entire screen. Some of the guides I did find were a little bit outdated. I had to kind of mix and match a little, so I thought I'd just make my own here to refer back to later. So, starting with a blank scene with just a floor and a canvas in world space. First, head to the asset store and import the free Oculus integration package. Next, remove the default camera, we won't be needing this. Add the OVR player controller prefab, which has its own camera. Find the local avatar prefab and add that as a child of tracking space. See, look, we already have our hands. Nice. Remove the current event system. Find the UI helpers prefab and throw that in there. Go into the new event system and select the right controller anchor as our ray transform. That will let us point with our right hand. Add the OVR physics raycast script to the OVR camera rig. Remove the current raycast script on the canvas, replace it with the OVR raycaster script, and we're done. Now we have a UI where we essentially just point a cursor at the canvas. We can see where we're pointing, we can click and drag, and we haven't got to write a whole bunch of code to navigate the UI because that's all handled by our cursor for us. Before we had 10 different buttons the user could press to enter their 1 to 10 distress rating after each level, but it feels more intuitive for that to just be a slider, so we're going to try that instead. Stuff like this is actually really easy in Unity. The scroll bar is just its own thing, like a button or a text element. It's already coded, so you haven't got to do any of that yourself. You can basically just point it to whatever method you like, and it will fire off a call whenever you change the value. The buttons work in the same way with firing off a call to a certain method whenever you click the button, for example. Here, I'm having the scroll bar pass itself as a parameter to that method. And then in the code, we're taking that scroll bar object and extracting the value to get the input from the user, and then displaying this back out the UI. To bring this experiment a bit more in line with how it might look in the final product, I added a few more UI elements, some more buttons, so that we can mimic entering a different distress rating at each level like in the previous prototypes. Now, not only can we point to the canvas with our controller, we can see the level we're on, click and drag to pick an input, go to the next level and have that input be recorded, go back to the last level if we want to. This should serve as a pretty good UI prototype for our final system. Success! Next episode will be drawing out an overall design for the architecture of the system, how the classes fit together, how each script talks to each other. Having our heads around how the UI will not only look, but also function in the code will really help us come up with a design that we won't be regretting later on. That's pretty much it for this one. This has been really informative for me because I knew much less than I thought about UIs in Unity before I started. So hopefully it's been useful for some of you guys out there too. I think this might end up being an unusually instructional video in the overall series of these dev diaries. A step-by-step how-to guide isn't really what I'm going for. I'm more looking just to kind of share with you guys what I learn each week. It just turned out that I knew very little about what I was getting into this time around. So that's kind of how it turned out. But yeah, I hope it was interesting. I'll catch you guys in the next one.